Andy Burnham says there will be difficult decisions to be made on tax as he bids to reform social care. The Prime Minister said he would bring forward Baroness Casey's review of the sector by a year. He also pledged to create a national care service. And he said he would work with his political rivals to find that common ground.
We're all going to have to give and take here, aren't we, if we're going to get to a solution? We're all going to have to listen to each other, something we don't do particularly well in politics. Actually engage and listen to other perspectives. We're going to have to find common ground here. If this is to be a lasting solution, it requires common ground to be found, and then ultimately you would hope a new social consensus can emerge.
Well, the Lib Dem leader Ed Davey says that talks today have been constructive but are just the beginning of the process. Eleanor Hayward is the health editor of The Times. Eleanor, just put into pretty succinct form what we actually learned from Andy Burnham's speech today.
So he didn't make any major policy announcements in terms of what he wants to happen to social care, but he really signalled his intent and said this is at the top of his to-do list for the government. He wants to get at least us on a roadmap to fixing it well before the next election, and as part of that he's bringing forward a review which will have the concrete proposals to this time next year. That was initially meant to be 2028.
And this is Louise Casey's review that's being referred to. There have been reviews before. What's likely to be in a new review?
Good question. Probably not that much different from previous reviews. The thing that needs to happen this time is that Burnham sticks with it, and that will need some sort of cross-party consensus, which he said he's going to try and get. Like you said, we've had all these reviews before, and they always fall down because people don't want to have to pay for it. They don't want their taxes to go up. And I think that's where Burnham did strike quite a different tone today, saying that he's willing to sort of lose political capital on this and push through options that aren't necessarily popular in order to get the issue fixed.
And he was very keen, wasn't he, Eleanor, to say that the people who end up spending all of their savings on looking after elderly relatives, or the elderly relatives themselves have spent all of their savings in order to be looked after, they are the people that Andy Burnham sees, they are the people that Andy Burnham hears. And that's his attempt, isn't it, to offset what you've mentioned, the continual criticism about taxing people in order to give them care.
Yeah, he referred to it as a roulette. So at the moment, if you go into old age, you might be lucky and not need social care, in which case you've won the roulette, but you might be one of the unlucky people, and it's quite a high proportion, who do need to go into a care home or need at-home care. And if you're one of those people, if you get dementia, then you're potentially losing your house, losing all your life savings. And Burnham's making the argument that it makes much more sense to share that risk out so that everyone pays a bit rather than some people paying everything.
How do other countries of a similar kind of size and makeup to the UK manage their increasingly elderly populations? And that is the large body of social care that we're talking about, isn't it?
Yeah, so our system is basically the least generous when you compare us to all other major Western economies. There's a mix of different systems. So Denmark is kind of the opposite end of the spectrum. That's where all social care is provided for free, which is what Burnham's indicated he wants. But even in that Danish system, then you still have to pay for some costs. So if you're in a care home, you'd have to pay for food and for the accommodation costs out of your savings. Now, other countries, so places like Australia and Germany and Japan, you sort of pay throughout your life, either through a social insurance model or just through general taxation, to a fund that is then used specifically for care in old age. So the state doesn't cover the whole costs of care, but everyone, regardless of how rich they are, does get some sort of state help. So there's some kind of universal offer, like the state will contribute to your costs. But most countries still require people there's some sort of means testing, so you still do have to pay for some element of care in old age. Denmark's a bit of an outlier where everything is free. So I think, if there is social care reform, people shouldn't necessarily expect that all care costs will be covered by the state, because that doesn't really happen anywhere.
The cross-party support that is needed for substantial change to happen, I mean, it's already run into a tiny buffer, hasn't it? Because it's not all party support. It doesn't include reform. They've not been invited to the table. And it is politically difficult, Eleanor, isn't it, for even a party like the Liberal Democrats, who have always talked about social care. It is difficult for them to lock in to another government's aims and say, we just, we're not going to put up a fight here at all. That's almost unnatural. Is it necessary for them to say, yeah, we're just going to go all the way with you?
I think, Labour have a big majority, so they don't actually need other parties' support. I think the tricky thing is you want some sort of consensus, because you don't want in 2029, if Labour lose, this whole system of reform, which is going to take years and years, it's not going to be fixed by 2029, to just be scrapped straight away. I think the Lib Dems have said that they're going to support it almost, even if they don't agree with exactly the final proposals. So you'd hope there's some sort of consensus there. Reform have already said they're basically going to fight it, whatever it is. They've not even heard what the proposals are. So I don't think, Andy Burnham's getting criticised for not inviting them, but they've already said that they're not going to support it. And then the Tories, it's tricky because Labour and the Tories have very different philosophies on the size of the state, sort of individual responsibility, and so them reaching a joint agreement, I think, might be tricky as well. But Andy Burnham made a plea, he made it to the press as well today, just saying, be rational, be factual about this, and, sort of screaming and opposing things for the sake of opposing things doesn't help anybody.
Yeah, I heard that. I noted it.
Yeah.
Eleanor, thank you very much indeed. That is Eleanor Hayward, who's the health editor of The Times. Well, let's talk about the Liberal Democrat perspective on this with Alison Bennett, who is the Lib Dem MP for Mid Sussex and also the party's care spokesperson. Alison Bennett, very good afternoon from the afternoon show. Just set out your starting position on these reforms for us.
Thank you. The first thing I would say is that we're really pleased that in his second week in power, Andy Burnham's grasped this nettle and put it to the top of the agenda. We've set out 3 conditions that we want any cross-party talks to consider. And if Andy Burnham is going to bring forward a set of proposals, we think those 3 things are that family carers are front and centre. Secondly, that there is a universal safety net. So in our 2024 manifesto, we made the case and costed it for free personal care. And thirdly, we want to make sure that no one ever faces catastrophic costs. So 1 in 7 people in the population are thought to be in line to incur costs of about £100,000, which is absolutely horrific for them and for their family. We want to make sure that people are protected from that. We're interested in what the government's going to bring forward, and anything that does prove to take serious consideration, we need to make sure meets those 3 criteria. OK, and as yet you don't know whether what Andy Burnham is hoping to propose will meet those 3 criteria? My suspicion from looking at the papers today, what was in the Telegraph, what was in the Times, is that Andy Burnham himself doesn't yet know what the proposals will be. So Louise Casey was tasked by the previous Prime Minister with doing this review that was going to take 3 odd years to report. It's really good that Burnham's asked for Louise Casey to bring her conclusions forward by a year. I still wish it was happening more quickly, to be honest with you. But obviously there's a range of options on the table. And I think one thing that Louise Casey talked about a month or 2 ago was about having a national conversation about social care. So what that means is making sure that the public are engaged on this. More and more families are having loved ones caught up in the care system. They're seeing how it's failing them and the people they love most. They're seeing what the financial consequences are. The public need to say what is acceptable to them, both in terms of the level of care provided and what the costs might be. And I hope that through that public national conversation and cross-party talks, a common ground can be found that people can agree on, because that's the only way you can get a common consensus.
Sure. I mean, are there things that you believe should be done right away? If we just take that first criteria that you mentioned, putting family carers front and centre, well, there is what many people find a really shocking and insulting level of allowance for a family carer. I mean, that could be changed overnight, couldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So the carers allowance is one of pretty much the least generous benefit there is that the DWP administers, and the DWP has also historically administered it incredibly badly. Um,
So it's about, for some people, it's only about £87 a week, isn't it?
Exactly, and you have to be under a certain earnings limit to get it. Somebody once said to me that the carers allowance was designed in the early 1970s to pay for spinsters to look after their parents. It's now 2026. We live in a very different age. But a different thing that would help family carers would be if respite care was a sort of guaranteed offer for all family carers. So a couple of months ago, I knocked on a door, the lady answered it, and she said that she'd been caring for her disabled son his whole life. He's now in his mid-30s. A few years ago, a couple of decades ago, they would get a week's respite care, and she and her husband would be able to go to Spain, and they would just be a husband and wife, and they wouldn't be carers for their son. That's all been cut back now. They maybe get one day a year, and even then she's not confident about the quality of care that their son's receiving. So making sure that family carers get that wraparound support, it helps them keep caring for their loved ones, but it also helps the economy and helps people stay in work, and it's better for society as a whole.
Yeah. Can we talk honestly, Alison Bennett, about what cross-party support actually means? I mean, social care is a subject so close to the Lib Dem's heart, and it is particularly close to your leader's heart. He wrote an extraordinary book, didn't he, called Why I Care, which explained the role that he has had in caring for family members throughout his life. So, set against that background, how do you commit to somebody else's decision-making process about something that you may well feel you know more about?
I think this is one of the reasons why making sure that those cross-party talks happen and they're meaningful and they're done in good faith by all involved is so important. In January 2025, the previous Prime Minister announced cross-party talks when he appointed Louise Casey. I've been so disappointed that there have only been 2 meetings, one in September last year and one in, I think, May this year. That's not meaningful, and it's not at a pace of change that, builds trust and finds out where that consensus is. So, the Liberal Democrats will approach these talks, in good faith and with an open heart, and we hope all other political parties will do the same.
OK, but what happens if on the table is something like a death tax or a level of taxation that you don't want to agree to because you feel that your members and your MPs and the people who support you in communities don't want that to happen? What happens then? I mean, let's be grown up about it. It's great at the beginning of a process to ask for cross-party support, but we completely understand why sometimes that might not work out. Should we prepare for a little bit of disappointment on this?
Really hope not, because there have been 22 reviews of social care over the decades, and politicians have failed to find that agreement. We have an ageing population, but also about half of people who require social care are working age adults, with lifelong disabilities. We are failing people in every single walk of life, in every single part of the country, and we need to get this right. And I think Ed Davey said this morning that he's prepared to compromise on things if he can find that common ground, where maybe the Conservatives say something that wouldn't naturally be our starting point, but we would look at that and try to find that agreement, because the cost of not doing this to the country is enormous.
Yep. And I did hear Andy Burnham's call to arms for the press to not lump in with cynicism and an examination of how things couldn't possibly go right. So I just put this to you, and I don't want to sound naive about it, that given all of that, if I want to remain positive, should we actually start our stories today on Times Radio saying this is a really good day for care in this country?
I think so. I think for millions of family carers across the country, this is great news today, that it's actually top of the news agenda. People don't normally want to talk about social care in this country. We don't naturally want to talk about people getting ill, getting frail, people having lifelong disabilities, but it's a reality for millions and millions of people and their loved ones. And as a country, we have to look in our hearts and think about what kind of country we want to be. And do we want to be a society that looks after people and enables people, regardless of their circumstances and their abilities, to live to the fullest capacity they're able to? At the moment, we're not, and I want to see the country do so much better.
I want to put one question to you from one of our listeners, Polly, who says, regarding social care, please no solutions that result in the working age population paying out even more to the boomers. My partner and I live with our 2 kids in a 2-bedroom flat despite a good income. Meanwhile, my dad lives in a 6-bedroom house enjoying his winter fuel allowance and gold-plated triple-locked pension. What would you say to Polly?
So I would say to Polly that she makes a really powerful example of the debate about intergenerational fairness and unfairness. So yesterday I had a surgery with a constituent called Sarah. She worked from the age of 19 to 53, paying her taxes all the way. And when she turned 53, 2 of her close family members became poorly and she ended up having to give up work. Well, she came to me yesterday basically to say that the system supporting family carers is totally failing people like her. She's gone through all her savings. She's looking at a really rocky financial future. And she's somebody that's put into the system. And when she needed that support from the state, it wasn't there. So I think Polly makes a really good point about, as we travel through life, making sure that we have a fair settlement that people put in and then they get out what they need afterwards.
Well, let's hope that it works, and let's hope that it doesn't get met with cynicism along the way, and that cross-party support really does the business this time around.